I'm going to give you some context here if you don't know what we're talking about, but you've got some infighting that's become public with a Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor. Can we call it a kerfuffle? Has it gone to the level of kerfuffle? And it is a lot of soap opera. And I also think the thing that people are clucking about is there are about 6 or 7 things as interesting or more interesting that people aren't clucking about as it regards this New York Times story. But evidently, it would appear from the reporting that Rachel Nichols was protecting some real estate and Maria Taylor got caught in the crossfire. Before I give you any of my opinions here, I want to hear from Jemele and Amin, because this has been a talking point, and you're not going to hear about it on ESPN because they don't talk about this stuff when it happens to them. The transparency is something we can demand when the shame belongs to others. And so Amin can talk about this because he knows the personalities, and Jemele can talk about it because she knows this subject matter and this terrain. So Jemele, first of all, you read this story and thought what?
This is something that I knew about a year ago. I mean, because people have to realize that initially this was reported by Deadspin, but in a much different context than what we learned. But of course, as somebody who once worked at ESPN and worked there for 12 years, naturally, when the first story first started being reported, I heard from a lot of people who still work there. And in terms of, people venting and giving different context and perspectives about how they saw the situation. I think the situation is a lot more complicated than people have kind of weighed in and said. Yes, there is an element of race that is here, but there's also elements about our business that are quite common, unfortunately. And there's also elements of ambition, of territory, of a lot of things that are mixed in there. Bad management, I think that should be among at the top of the list, because I think this is really a reflection of a culture that was created by ESPN's management. I mean, ultimately, while you certainly can have your criticisms of Rachel Nichols in terms of how she handled it, you can have your criticisms of Adam Mendelsohn, LeBron's advisor, and what he said in his comments. But to me, so much of this rests on the lap of the people in charge.
The leadership here is something that you see in the reporting. You're waiting for an answer as something festers for a year. And one of the things that I found as interesting as the story in the New York Times is days before. And I'm always telling you guys this, where your leaks come from. Look around for your leaks on the how and the where. In the New York Post, all of a sudden, Maria Taylor, who did nothing wrong here and is the only one who looks good in this situation, she gets smeared with Want Stephen A money as her contract comes up during the finals. So, what kind of problem do they have on their hands here?
Well, the contract situation obviously makes things more complicated because now anything they do is a referendum, right? And ESPN is an animal that is very sensitive to public criticism and to what people are talking about it. So they've painted themselves in a corner now because they've mismanaged the whole situation, like Jemele said, where, how they treat Maria in this moment when her contract is up, which, by the way, is wow for the timing.
During the finals. Because of
finals.
everything that happened with the pandemic. I know this has been weaponized by the Whitlocks and the shit-stained Clay Travis. I know it's been weaponized where they go after Maria Taylor, and this is, if it is somehow an orchestrated leak in the New York Times, it is quite the leverage move. And in terms of business, it would be smart business for a management team to do that. I don't know if that's true, but that's how it's being weaponized.
Yeah, and man, there's another layer to this that Jemele didn't mention is 3 letters, CAA. They rep both of these parties, and they're known for, basically doing the Highlander thing. There can only be one. And I don't know if the general public knows or cares, really, because that's the other part of this. Who cares, right? Right now, we care because these are characters that we know, these are people we know, and it's a setting and arena that we're all familiar with, having been worked there. But the amount of influence that CAA has at ESPN, and the growth of influence over the last decade, is a direct driver for these types of conflicts to happen. And without that, I don't know if any of this comes to this sort of head, because what ESPN has done what I feel like over the last decade or so is a lot of kind of like trying to appease the letters as opposed to trying to take care of the talent who they're dealing with.
Jemele, he mentions that's the leadership to me. To me, the leadership here has been CAA's.
Well, this is where I'll slightly push back on what you said. I mean, is that, yeah, you're right. I mean, and as somebody who still receives representation from CAA, myself personally, let me be totally transparent with that, and have been since about 2013. So I guess I know every single party involved. But here's where I push back. I don't think this is there can only be one situation. I think the choice was made. And if we want to be just being fully honest here, is that the choice was made to have Maria as the host of Countdown. And we know the responsibilities and the duties that come with that. This is also an opportunity that clearly Rachel thought that she would like to be in line for and deserve, thus pitting them on a collision course. But nevertheless, the choice was made. And to me, with this, assuming this reporting is correct, that Rachel Nichols was promised to do the finals, that was the first mistake, okay? Because the reality is that is a duty reserved for the host. So my immediate question is, well, why did you even promise her to do that when you know you didn't pick her to be the host? So that's what I'm talking about with bad management. And maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's something that CAA negotiated on her behalf. But the bottom line is they said yes. And that is a direct reflection of the systemic stuff that happens at ESPN. If you're going to give Maria the hosting job, give her the hosting job, which means every component. And if that means you have to have a tough conversation with somebody, then you do. Because that's what you get paid to do as a manager. They certainly don't have problems having tough conversations with a lot of people around there, right? And so this is what I'm talking about, where the additional layer of not just bad management, but also sometimes being unable to tell people no. I mean, that's pretty much it. And I think the insulting part certainly for Black women, for Black people watching this play out, is we get told 1,000 times a day in various ways that the only reason that we got our jobs is because we're a diversity hire. Now, unpacking the layers of what Rachel said is that, do you think that ESPN considered and factored in the fact that, okay, here we have a primarily Black sport, we have a very talented hostess, a very talented on-air talent in Maria Taylor, and this is representative of what the league looks like. To me, there's no fault in considering that as part of your choice and reason to have her be the host. Because it's not about her ability. It's also about that fact that you want to have a product that actually reflects the league that you cover. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. If it is, we can argue about it, whatever. But that being said, is that there's still that undercurrent of the only reason she's there is because of that. And maybe I don't think Rachel was saying that explicitly, but that undercurrent was there. And that is the part that, frankly, why some of her colleagues are probably looking at her a particular way now, right now, especially some of her Black colleagues, because that's how it felt. And it's a sensitive nerve for us because we get told that all the time. And let me just also say, I've known Rachel for many years. I have never had a negative interaction with Rachel Nichols. She has always treated me well, but that doesn't mean my experience with her is not the blanket of who she is as a person. And I don't say that trying to go after her or whatever, but how somebody deals with you, they could deal with 10 other people in 10 totally different ways. Right. And so I'm not going to use my experience to say that, oh, this proves without a doubt that Rachel Nichols is and possibly could never have done something shady. Right. I don't know that because I don't know her that well to say what she would or wouldn't do.
So I guess my thing is, first of all, you're right. Beyond Maria, being representative of the sport that she covers, she's awesome at her job.
Correct.
She's like,
if you could get both,
yeah,
win-win,
exactly.
Right.
So to me, it's not a question about her efficacy, or even here's the part. This is the part where I was trying to say on Twitter, but it never comes across. People assume that ESPN is this extremely well-run company, and that the logic that Jemele just laid out there, like, this is a black sport. You want, the faces that cover the sport to be somewhat in line with that. And so we've got someone who's awesome at her job, and she's black, and she has a rapport with the people. It's a great choice. But the problem is, we know that's not how ESPN makes decisions, right? Like, all that is true, and also ESPN doesn't make decisions like that. Oh my God, they're coming for us. Put somebody black out there. Yeah. And you know this, and we all know this, because we saw, Dan, how many times over the years, topics that we wanted to touch, and we get a call from the babysitter. Don't do that. Stay away from that, right? And the moment last summer happened, all of a sudden, everyone has free reign to talk in very specific terms about white supremacy, about how Jemele was wronged because everything she said was true, and she caught the sword for it. And then 3 years later, we're all allowed to say it on ESPN air, on every platform, and no one says a word. Do you think ESPN made a strategic, well, the numbers are No, they're panicking. They panicked, and they threw whatever they thought would stop the fire.
And it led pretty directly to Maria Taylor's rise at the company, and her profile at the company, and her voice at the company, and her voice behind the scenes. Jemele, what kind of problem in-house do they have now? That was uncomfortable for me to watch Rachel Nichols give 10 seconds of apology, and then Kendrick Perkins and Richard Jefferson went 2 minutes on the subject of race, where she has to sit out the conversation that was caused by what she was calling in the report spy video from a hotel.
They have a massive problem on their hands, but it's not a massive problem that started with Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor. It's what Amin was talking about, is that when you are constantly reacting to public criticism or to the moment, as opposed to having structural things in place where you address these things, that's why you wind up looking sloppy and crazy before the rest of the world. And, thinking about, my situation is like they were reacting to a moment then. That moment said that people didn't want to hear any political talk, any racial talk, any social justice talk. Not that that was something Mike and I were doing every day on SportsCenter. We weren't. They let a false narrative persist about our show that people just kind of ran away with. They let the idiots in the room control the conversation. People like Clay Travis. That's what happened. And because they allowed those people to direct their course of action, they panicked. And suddenly they were very intentional about the things that they were doing in our show. They wanted black faces. They didn't want necessarily black voices. And that's how it came off, right? And so because of that, ultimately, we wound up paying the price. Yep. I mean, sure, there were things that Mike and I could have done differently on SportsCenter with just getting our show together, but we never got that time because they were too busy responding to conservative media. And so whenever you keep doing that, that's how you wind up with sloppy situations. And it shouldn't have taken a George Floyd for ESPN to allow commentators and people like Dan and me and you and me to discuss racism in this country. That doesn't mean that we would discuss it every day or every hour, but just within the context that seems appropriate, which is all any of us asked to do. Nobody came to work every day at ESPN and said, you know what I want to talk about today? Immigration reform. Nobody did that shit. So it's like, they were responding to people who didn't even watch ESPN.
Right.
And so now this is just another form of that problem where they have allowed a situation between these two women to completely fester. Nobody has stepped in and said, okay, we need to figure out something. And now they have a massive problem on their hand because they have been exposed in a way that ESPN is not comfortable being exposed. And I'll just say this quickly before we, continue the discussion. Watching, Rachel and Perk and Richard Jefferson address this very uncomfortably on the jump is something that unfortunately ESPN also has a track record of, is like acknowledging but not really addressing. They knew they couldn't put her on TV yesterday and her not saying anything. And to me, either you're going to put her on there and allow her to really dive into it, or you just leave it alone. And what wound up happening is you put everybody that was on air in a bad position. And now you have the optics of having Kendrick Perkins and Richard Jefferson having to defend Rachel Nichols over a situation they didn't cause, create, and have nothing to do with. So either have her address the camera by herself and leave the other two out of it, or just don't even do it. Because what people saw yesterday could not possibly have covered many of the things that have come up in the last 3 days.
So, Jemele, I love that point because that's one of those things where I'm watching and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what happened, right? We have to address it, right? Because you can't just not talk about it. So, but we're not going to do a whole show. We'll do one segment. All right, Rachel talk. But wait a second. If Rachel talks and you've got 2 black people there and they don't get to chime in, well, how is that going to look?
Well, let's get a black woman. How about Maria Taylor? No.
Oops.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
Yeah. Can't do that. And
no. And then even I remember the day after those tweets I had about Trump exploded, and or the day of. I mean, the conversations, all that went on. Yes, I'm one of those people who's saving it for the memoir. Everything that happened, I'm being real. I'm saving it for the memoir. But they wouldn't let me address it at all, and I'm like, the entire world is talking about this right now, and they wanted no parts of it. And we made a couple jokes about it, but that was like it. And so to see it come full circle into this, I was like, oh, well, this is interesting.
also interesting because I want to get in point by point to the things that I found as interesting as the soap opera elements that got everyone clucking. But when you guys talk about reacting to the reaction, it's not just that. It's reacting to the reaction from people who don't look like us. It's not reacting to the reaction because you've got leadership that is a bunch of women people are listening to or a bunch of black dudes people are listening to. It's not just reaction to the reaction. It's those decisions are not being made by either the people in the center of the controversy or the people above them of color who might have a different perspective, because none of those people are in power. Not real power.
No. Go ahead, Jemele.
No, I was just gonna say, like, ESPN has like such a pretty team picture. I always thought that because I mean they have the most diversity when you look at on air talent. I mean, ESPN, they have the power, they have a lot of the jobs, they have the on air talent. Where it's like if you just watch ESPN for a day, you would think like it's a pretty diverse workplace. Yeah, and then you start peeling some layers back. I was like, nah, you need to walk around ESPN's campus and look in some of those C-suite offices, and it's a completely different picture. And of course, I mean, they do have, people who are, they do have people of color who are there at ESPN, some of which are in high roles. But I often wonder, especially in situations like this, are those people empowered to actually give the company direction in moments like this, or even beyond moments like this? Are they empowered, period? And I think to be decided would be my best answer.
Jemele, I think when it comes to diversity at ESPN on air, on the talent, it is a box that is usually checked off by, let's just get a former athlete, right? And by the way, that's not an ESPN specific problem because I saw it working in the front offices in the NBA. If you're white, you can be anything you want in this organization, right? Where'd you go to school? You can have any background. If you're black, where'd you play? Right? That's how they check the diversity box. We'll just get the former athletes. That's where we get our diversity. But then I can have gone to MIT or I've gone to Columbia or whatever and had an academic background in life or even worked somewhere, some unrelated industry, and come right in here and be those things. And so there's that element. And then when you talk about on the management side, Jemele, you and I have a mutual friend. I'm not going to say their name, who is a person who is, let's just say, diverse, right? Who came in and had to watch people less qualified meet and then overtake their status within the company. And then when things got hot for the company, they gave this person a kind of like a promotion, a nice title.
Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about too.
I know.
I already know.
I don't want to say their name because that the point isn't about them. The point is that's what Jemele's talking about. We say it looks diverse, but is it really diverse if these people don't have a say and as things are happening aren't consulted and are seeing people be promoted over them? This is the company we're talking about. So when again, it's not about Maria. It's never been about Maria because Maria is deserving. Maria is awesome at her job. But stop acting like this company is a rational company that does things the right way. That thought process that Jemele outlined at the beginning, which is, hey, it would be really good if we had that. No, they don't do it like that. They do it when they're pressured and because they're very sensitive to criticism.
Are you allowed to publicly, I know Steven Jackson got dragged on this yesterday, are you allowed to publicly also feel bad for Rachel Nichols? While wincing at the video, I know a lot of people want this to be punitive. I know a lot of people are wondering, Paul Pierce is let go because he's doing something in his home that he's putting on Instagram, and there are no consequences here except to a producer, a low-level producer is the only one who endured consequences. Rachel. You've worked with Rachel. Rachel has been good. We all like Rachel. Rachel, you shouldn't hit her with privilege because she worked her ass off over all sorts of obstacles to get to where she is. But are you allowed? I think the public scorn is enough. I think that's unpleasant enough.
I'm going to say this. I'm allowed to do whatever the hell I want. I'm allowed to do whatever the hell I want. And Jemele, I know at the beginning you said you know Rachel, but you don't know her that well. I know Rachel that well. And I'm of the mind that my friends, I stand up for my friends. When my friends are being misunderstood, I stand up for them. It's a stance that's got me in trouble at work. It's a stance that got me in trouble at home. It's a stance that doesn't provide a whole lot of material value for me other than my peace of mind at night. That I know when my friends get in trouble, I stand up for them. Just like I stood up for Jemele, just like I stood up for Mark Stein. I stand up for my friends.
Sorry, that's my. I'm in a hotel and everybody's.
But
I just had to punctuate Amin's beautiful speech with that.
The lawyers are calling.
Get him out there.
What are you doing? You're setting fire to everything. What are you doing? Save it for the memoir.
I think one of the things that we need to talk about is the concept of privacy, right?
Once we get the gotcha, though, the privacy, it just vanishes.
But here's the thing. I actually wrote this down because it staggered me that this was the excerpt here. It is not clear why her camera was on, but most people at ESPN believe that Nichols, using new technology during a pandemic, did not turn it off properly. It was effectively the remote pandemic version of a hot mic incident. Bullshit. Rachel knows how to use it. It's the TVU app. We've all used it before the pandemic on remotes. They give you a little iPhone. Now it's an iPad, but they used to give you an iPhone and a tripod, and you hook it up and you use it.
I found that part fascinating, that once we got the gotcha, everyone stopped caring about, man, none of you would have liked this particular thing to happen to you and spread without anybody being concerned about the privacy, especially at a company where Erin Andrews was in a hotel room and we went through the whole private video thing.
Well, I mean, I guess my question to you, Amin, is like, are you asserting that something nefarious happened? Like,
you're goddamn right I am. Because I've used the TVU app. I've had the conversations with the people in transmissions about like, not ready to go yet, whatever. It's like, all right, it's all good. We can flick it on. Mm-hmm. They have the control to turn it off and on over there. If your iPad is up, they have you are offline, they can go, nope, boop, you're online. Imagine your Zoom meeting and you left your Zoom meeting and they said, no, you don't, come back right here. They can do that, right? That exists. And because it's not the 20s or whatever, or I don't know who came in here. People log in. There's digital fingerprints everywhere. We can at least narrow it down to who was working between those hours. They had access to this thing. And I'm sorry, we talk about management and leadership. The moment that thing happens, regardless of what Rachel says, Rachel could have gone full Trump, and we would have dealt with that later for Rachel. But also, I'm lining up everybody that said, if someone doesn't step up, you're all getting fired. Everyone who worked that ship. Because the reality is, you cannot have violations of privacy happening like that. And when that story broke last year, and I'm kind of following up with Rachel and other people, and I'm realizing, it's not a priority at all for the company to catch the culprit. They kind of, well, what are we going to do? We don't know how. Maybe she didn't know how to use it. That's ridiculous. It's cowardice. And by the way, it's illegal. Like, forget about morality and all that. It's illegal for that person to do what they did, and then to peddle it is another level. And you mentioned Kayla Johnson getting suspended, right? That's also a very ESPN move, right? Something awful happens. Let me find the smallest person in the room and pick on them. Because,
yeah, and I guess that's why I wanted some clarification, because I know that Kayla ultimately paid the penalty. And to me, what made that even worse is not only do you find the smallest person, but somebody who probably cannot afford to go 2 weeks without making money. Right. And so it's just very alarming that she would be the sacrificial lamb and all that. And thankfully she's moved on to bigger and better.
Yep.
But anybody who's worked with Kayla, and I've worked with her, I had the pleasure of working with her a few times. She's bright, she's talented, she's smart, she's a lot of things. And, I know people wondered, like, well, and I mean, this is like, there is a level of solidarity, especially that Black people in this business have and in that building have. And if I hear somebody that is, talking badly about somebody that I consider to be a friend, I'm gonna let them know. And particularly in this situation, so I know a lot of people want to take aim at Kayla for relaying the information. I'm like, listen, I would do the same thing. I'd be like, yo, keep your head on the swivel, because this is what I hear.
For those of you who do not know, the report in the New York Times, Kayla Johnson, she told HR that she sent the video to Taylor. She was suspended for 2 weeks without pay. The reporting of the New York Times is that she then got lesser jobs and eventually left the company.
Yep, and that's a very ESPN move. And to be clear, I know someone said, wait a second, you just said let's line up the 12 people who are available and threaten to fire them all. That's different. Someone in that group was responsible for this being created. What Kayla did was what one of many people did, A, in terms of sharing it, and B, what Jemele just said. Kayla works with Maria on multiple shows, is very close with her, and heard something that she felt was disparaging about her friend. Absolutely. She's going to share it and send it. And I don't have
I assume company policy is you're supposed to go to HR in that circumstance. I do understand why a Black woman at a place where Black women feel like they're not heard and they can't get ahead would go straight to the Black woman and say, did you see this? That's pretty human. That's the human in human resources. Sometimes human resources about the resources and not about the humans.
Right. Like the idea that I would tell HR, first of all, Kayla wasn't patient zero in terms of the first person to share it once it came to her. She was one of many. Second of all, the idea that something would happen. Let's say something happened here at Meadowlark, and I would not tell the person that happened to. I would go tell HR and then let that person live in blissful ignorance. I'm sorry. Again, this goes back to I can't sleep at night like that. I look after my friends. I tell them I would do exactly what Kayla did.
Yeah, I mean, Dan was asking about whether or not I feel bad for Rachel. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know what I feel, really, and because I think that's okay too, to not know, how you feel. And
it's not okay. You know this, Jemele, in the argument.
Oh yeah, I gotta have a hot take. That's right.
No, I love that. That's you. Of course.
Donor.
This has got so many layers on it. Yeah. And I'm pleased to hear you admit that, because it's not an easy admission, but I think it's the honest admission.
Yeah. I mean, it's as honest as I can be. It's I don't know really how to feel about it. Is that I don't have a close enough relationship with Rachel to be out here defending her and to say exactly what's in her character, even though, again, having known her for as many years as I have, and having had good conversations with her, that's the extent of it. So I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like Rachel and I are besties, like we aren't, right? And so even though I wouldn't consider us friends, I would consider us friendly. And so not to the point where I feel like I need to put on a cape, to be quite honest. It's no, I don't really feel the need to do that. Now, do I feel like she should be stoned to death and burned at the stake, as many people on Twitter and social media want her to be? No, I mean, I don't think that's really the appropriate response in many situations and cases. But ultimately, I guess as somebody who spent 12 years being a Black woman in this industry, um, knowing the inside of what this feels like. I mean, every job with the exception of maybe one or two jobs I've had in this business over the course of my 20-year career, there were a lot of jobs that people said I didn't deserve to have, or
Mhm.
I'm only there. I remember when I became a sports columnist in Orlando when I was 28 years old. I was the only Black female sports columnist in North America. Notice I didn't say America. I was the
Mhm.
only Black female sports
Canada
columnist at
and
a
Mexico.
yes, Mexico and Canada was not.
I'm gonna
They were
guess
also
South.
part of
I'm
this.
gonna guess South America too, perhaps, and you don't
Yeah,
even know it.
yes, I think it's fair to say, but based off a survey that was done, I was one out of 405 at a daily newspaper. And the number of people when I got that job, and keep in mind, I was just the third columnist at the Sentinel. I wasn't in first chair and I wasn't even second chair. I had 2 days a week that I wrote. And one of those days, my column appeared on the inside of the sports section, not even out front. So this is truly in column writing an entry level position. And I don't want to make it seem like it was some angry mob, but of course, I heard all the whispers of people telling me I didn't deserve it. And I'm like, wow, I can't even be third? Like, really? I don't deserve that. It was the same when I got to ESPN, when I made the jump from Orlando to ESPN. I remember a very untimely story came out about my salary. Sounds familiar, right?
Mm.
That said that it was reported that I was making $200,000 a year
The nerve.
moving to the Orlando Sentinel, which I wasn't, by the way. And suddenly it was not only does she not deserve this job, they paying this heifer what? Like that was that's what it was. And so I have gone through this so many times in my career. Sports Center, his and hers, like all the time. And so at some point, there's an exhaustion level for me as a Black woman that why is it every job that we get we just don't deserve? If they loved us that much, wouldn't you see more of us? Clearly, clearly we're not what's hot in the street because it's not a whole lot of us out here.
Bomani says it all the time, and Bomani's got it plenty tough as being an opinionated, won't stand down Black man having opinions throughout sports. He says it all the time. Jemele had it harder than any of us by leaps and bounds, what she had to overcome. And I want to talk to her about the layers of this story that involve gender and race. But I also need to point out, because we're live on YouTube and Jemele and Amin have a sense of humor, and we have not done enough laughing around this. Stugotz had to move his car. And so even though Stugotz's every response to conversations like this is it's an important conversation and I'm glad we're having it, it looks, the optics of this are white privilege in Tahoe just left the conversation entirely, bored by everything that Amin and Jemele were talking about. And here he is returned.
I'm back.
You know what, Stugotz? I'm Black. I don't get to leave the conversation.
What happened?
Jemele, how is this story different if it's not a white woman and a Black woman? If it's two men being ambitious? If it's not the racial element? How is this story different?
Well, I think that I wonder. Granted, the other salacious element we have to include is the fact that it's a recorded conversation. So I think that is ultimately what has amped this up to another level. With the races, if they were different or transposed, or if this were two Black women or just two white women, then I think that some of this might have been reported, but not nearly with the degree. I don't think it would reaches and rises to the level that we've seen it. And oh, by the way, and that was something that I hinted to in my kind of initial comments, is that this is quite common in our industry, right? Is that people get promised things in contracts. All of us, when we're at the negotiating table, we do our damnedest to get every dollar, every cent, every assignment. That is what we do. People are very territorial over what they cover. It often and creates conflicts with others. And, sometimes there have been situations that I've known about at ESPN that have occurred that have reached this level where you have two people not talking to each other, where you have people having to pick sides, where you have to have sit downs. Like I have witnessed this many times at ESPN. So as ugly as this may seem on the outside to people, it's really common. And I'll say this, like that part, I think, is also part of the reaction, particularly that you may have seen from women, from Black women in particular, is that we do often hear, from white women that will say like, oh, we're all here for, diversity and moving up and all this. And then when it becomes a competitive situation, all that allyship goes out the window, right? And yeah, you're allowed to be competitive in your job, but I do think there's a way that you can be competitive without having to crush everything in your path. And so I think that there was definitely a lot of this situation sprung forward a lot of those conversations as well.
So that's the question I wanted to ask everybody, right? Because everyone, pointed out to me, oh, yeah, because she saw her as a threat or whatever. That's what, that shows you how not down for the cause she is, Rachel, in this, what they're referring to. And I said, well, this isn't the stereotypical generic white person is angry that black person got a great position that white person had no chance of getting, right? A lot of people I can't believe Jemele Hill got, well, was it ever down to you and Jemele Hill? No, then shut up. Like, it has nothing to do with you. In this case, it was something that was actually taken away from Rachel based on, in that conversation, her contract. She was promised this and she wasn't getting it. There's not a person in this industry who has something taken out of their contract who isn't gonna fight for that shit. They give a damn about supporting anything. Like, it's in many ways, it's the Liam Neeson thing, right? Yes, women should absolutely get paid more. Should we take some of the money that we promised you? Hell no. That's my money. But you guys can figure it out somewhere else. That is the most natural human reaction. And what Rachel said had nothing to do with, like, Maria's not capable, Maria's not qualified. It's just, you're not going to take something that's mine, right? Out of all the jobs here, all the jobs that are held by white men, you're gonna pick mine after all the shit I went through? And Rachel's been through a lot of shit too at that company that I'm not gonna go into and discuss. And that brings me to the point that I wanted to get about when we're talking about privacy, which is privacy. And I wrote this down because I wanted to get it right. Privacy is also about the freedom to express a sentiment without worrying about filtering or messaging, right? The conversations that we have in private, not to say that they can be wildly different. Like, hi, I love potato chips. And then in private, goddamn, potato chips are the worst thing ever, right? But when I speak publicly, if I am a sponsor, an endorser of Lay's potato chips, I say potato chips are my favorite snack. And then behind closed doors, I might say, you know what? Sometimes the salt irritates me. Or, you know what? Sometimes I just can't have another potato chip. I gotta keep a couple weeks off. I could never say that publicly because that would ruin kind of the endorsement. And also, people don't have room for nuance in that. So when we speak publicly, it's curated on some level. When I speak privately, I might exaggerate. I might, take away some of the nuance because you get it. The receiver, in this case, is someone I'm talking to in private. They get what I'm trying to say. So people are taking what Rachel said, which, by the way, if you listen to it and read through it, she never throws Maria under the bus in any way. She's just talking about her particular territory, her real estate that's been taken away from her. And this is one of the things, she even talks about white conservative male Trump voters in power at ESPN who are giving a hard time. But the one thing I want to say here is, so there's this quote from Rachel, and then afterwards, the writer says, multiple black ESPN employees said they told one another after hearing the conversation that it confirmed their suspicions that outwardly supportive white people talk differently behind closed doors. That had nothing to do with Rachel, though. That has nothing to do with Rachel. Like, if you have this belief about, which I believe, yes, there are white people who are like, yeah, I love it, and then, these black people, right? But that's not what Rachel did. And that's not what Rachel's about. And I guess that comes into me, quote unquote, being a cape in this scenario, is that I know her. And I'm not going to let people say that's the type of person she is. But it all comes back to that tenet of privacy, is that I don't have to worry about wording it just the right way.
I was stunned. I was stunned that everyone, once they had the gotcha, didn't care about the privacy at all. Jessica, what do you got here?
I just think, like, to Amin's first point, this is part of the problem that is baked into the system that you have two really talented women competing for one spot. There can only be one spot for a talented woman on this broadcast. We let the men have numerous spots on the broadcast, but Maria and Rachel now have to fight for the scraps because that's how it works. You can only have one woman on the show.
There's another element to this, by the way, which is the Game of Thrones of ESPN, particularly on the NBA side. The power struggle. The moment I cackled, ladies and gentlemen, I cackled out loud reading this article, was the quote that Adrian Wojnarowski called someone else a bad teammate. Are you, can I cuss? I don't know.
I mean, you've already done that.
Are you fucking shitting me? This guy's going to call someone a bad teammate? For real? For real? Do we want to talk about the black careers that he put a foot on because he was threatened by? Do we want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about the newsbreakers with an S of diverse backgrounds who have rapport with players that Adrian doesn't have, that he saw as threatening because his sources are all front office people and assistant coaches trying to move up and maybe a video coordinator who's trying to get a better job somewhere else. But he can't talk to LeBron. And he can't talk to Chris Paul or Damian Lillard or some of these other guys. He doesn't have that rapport with them. So what he does is he steps on them. And he's stepping on, and beyond that particular angle, he steps on a lot of people over there. He steps on a lot of people over there, right? When you see a byline that says, as reported by Adrian Wojnarowski and fill in the blank, that's the old, put my name on it and put it out there.
Well, he's running everything over there. He is running most of basketball over there.
And so,
but to be fair, I mean, if we gonna go there, and that's part of my concern is like, there, when I was there was a perception that Rachel was the same way.
Rachel was putting her name on people's stories?
No, not that part. Sorry. That when it came to the NBA, that she was ruthless. That was the perception.
But men can be ruthless, Jemele.
I'm not here to criticize it, but I'm just saying that was the same perception that she had.
I'm not gonna deny what you said. I haven't heard that, but again, I'm not plugged in the same way.
But Jemele, there are a lot of people fighting for space here, and this is the vanity business.
That doesn't make her unique, and that doesn't make her like. I'm sure Adam Schefter is the same way.
Sure,
I'm sure that's the nature of kind of the job.
But the part where someone pipes in, you're a bad teammate. You're being a bad teammate. Really? Come on, man. Give me a break. Particularly when it comes to the element of race in this. If we're going to inject that race in there, give me a break.
More to the point, Jemele, as it relates to Rachel, how difficult is it going to be for her to do that job? You are none of these one thing that ends up sticking to people. Rachel Nichols is more than the defining thing of the moment here that becomes just not multidimensional enough, as the poor actress Rachel Nichols from, what is that, Criminal Minds, wakes up in the morning and she's like, man, sports are toxic. She wakes up in the morning because she's got the same name and people are just burying her. How difficult is it going to be in this sport to have this attached to you if people don't want to do the nuance on this one?
I would imagine it would be difficult. I mean, I guess if you're a player, then you have to weigh her work for the last, decades or so against what you just read, and people are going to have the optics of it look bad because you have a white woman and a black woman, and all that. So that's going to be something that she'll have to deal with, but also in the building. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of her black colleagues who are suspicious right now, who are wondering right now about who she is as a person, even if they've worked with her. They're wondering like, oh, does she have something different to say, kind of when they're not around. And so I think that's part of it. And also what becomes of her career at ESPN, because I have seen them in the past when people get into controversial situations, they may not outwardly punish them, whereas there may not be a suspension, there may not be something that happens that's visible, but slowly they diminish them to the point where they just don't want to be there anymore.
Have you seen that?
Really?
I've kind of seen that happen. I mean, I'm sure no one on this
That sounds
stream has
somewhat
any
familiar.
knowledge of that whatsoever.
Wait a minute. So what happens? So you like lose part of your show and you end up on ESPN Plus? Like what hypotheticals are it that you speak of
Just
here?
saying, just throwing it. I mean, it's
Really?
called the
So
death
you
by
have a
1,000 paper cut
situation where you
strategy.
go see the president of the company in New York and then the show starts shrinking. Really?
Take an hour off, right?
Yeah, just thinking, not that you guys would know anything about that. Yeah, but it happens at ESPN.
I want to read you a couple of quotes here. We've got Stan Van Gundy waiting to get into the show, but one of the things, I think I've got a list of 6 or 7 of them here, but I have not heard, never mind a former ESPN employee, an employee while they're at ESPN say, if you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity, which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it. And then later in the quote, those same people who are like generally white conservative male Trump voters is part of the reason I've had a hard time at ESPN. That feels a little systemic in a way that should probably be at the forefront of this soap opera. Like, I mean, you've got a voice, a star voice in that sport saying that. Like, for all the gotcha, why does that gotcha get sort of missed on this one as we go after the 2 principal stars? And we're sort of missing, when have you heard a voice say that that's at the company?
Well, privately, I've heard
All the time?
said. Yeah, I've heard it said a lot, I mean, I think I probably said it myself a few times. Exactly. But this is why as we parse out the responsibility of this is why I said ultimately a lot of this is on management and leadership. And reading that story, it's hard not to look at this and say, what the hell is going on there, right? And it's not things that are new to any of us because we have either witnessed it, experienced it, seen it during our time at ESPN. But that's the thing that they have to address that's much harder to address. And you can't always address it by putting somebody on a show, making somebody a host, hiring a former player. Like, it's not going to be addressed that way because it's baked into the core system of how they do things. And that requires a lot of work, commitment, and it requires the things that typically people aren't willing to do. They just don't want to say that because it's impolitic to say. It is, they know they can't quote unquote get away with it. But the truth is, that's exactly why I tweeted when all of this was kind of going down. It's like I said last summer, all those companies putting out these "we care about Black people" statements, Black Lives Matter, they all did it last year in the wake of everything that was happening in this country. Don't pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do. That tells the story.
What she does is important. Jemele, you've just signed. I haven't told people. Stan Van Gundy's going to be here in a second, but what do I need to tell people in general about where they can find you? Because you're doing the most important work of your career here with Spotify to empower and give voices to Black women because of your pioneering path. So what do people need to know about where to find you, how, and thank you for the time you spent with us here today.
Always a pleasure to have a nuanced conversation, Dan. You don't get a lot of those in our business sometimes. But no, I'm really proud of this, developing this network with Spotify for Black women, about Black women, using Black female talent, behind the scenes Black women, because I think, there is a tendency in this country to overlook, frankly, ignore and dismiss, the nuance of Black women. And it's all great when everybody's running to us to save the democracy, i.e. Stacey Abrams. But then after all that whole yes girl and Black girl magic shit goes away, then, what is left? Then people don't want to hear from us. And then we're not as powerful. We're not a voice unless we're saving somebody else. So this to me is not just my tribute and my love letter to Black women, but something that I want to be a lasting legacy related to opportunity and empowerment and amplification. So we're building this thing up from the ground, and we're, of course, beginning to canvas and look at talent and figure out just kind of the direction we want to take things in year one. But feeling really good about it. And yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be something really, really special.
Appreciate the strength and the honesty, Jemele. Thank you for giving us your time today. I know you're busy.
All right. Appreciate it, guys.